much for your hard work there. And the rapporteurs who were diligently taking notes, and I will briefly be calling upon to share some of the key outcomes. So with that in mind, maybe we could turn to the session that we just had in this room, which was the knowledge session. And I know it was facilitated by Pasang. I'm not sure who the rapporteur is, but maybe I could invite the rapporteur from the knowledge session to briefly give some remarks on the key discussions and outcomes from that room.
Thomas, it was Nigel that did the report for this group 1.
Okay, Nigel, could you please take the floor and give us a short summary of the discussions? I'm not sure if I'm seeing a message. Someone may need to unmute Nigel. Could I ask the Secretariat to please unmute Nigel?
Okay, now can you hear me?
Yes, thanks very much.
Thank you to the Secretariat for doing that. Okay, well, there was a very rich and useful discussion, and we've got just the main points to summarize. I think that if it helps, I may be able to share some of this feedback on the screen. Can you see that? Is that visible to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is these are points, and I could do something a little bit better and send it through to you afterwards. So the focus of the discussion was on the fact that in the mandate of the FWG, in talking about the knowledge stream and also the mandate under the Paris Agreement, that there are the two elements. The one is to set up the platform, and the other is to strengthen the role of Indigenous knowledge within the work. So the emphasis in the discussion was on the first element, the element of actually strengthening Indigenous knowledge within the UNFCCC process. And in those discussions, a lot of the attention was on the impact that needs to have on the ground. So looking at the empowerment, support, help for the knowledge holders themselves and their functions, as well as looking at the transformation of the relationship between the science holders and the holders of Indigenous knowledge, and how the instruments and mechanisms of the UNFCCC, notably the NAPs, NDCs, and NAPAs, can be facilitating, supportive, and understanding of that process. Regarding activities 1, 2, and 3, so 1 being the annual global meeting of Indigenous knowledge holders and stakeholders and parties, 2 being the regional one, and 3 being the activity on education. There was a strong support on continuing the first 2 elements within the new work plan, that the COVID process has interrupted a lot the dialogues at a global and regional level, but that should hopefully improve as moving forward, and the COP26 will provide an opportunity for a global dialogue. There were a number of different views on activity 3, including that if the FWG wants to prioritize its work, it might consider not carrying activity 3 into the new work plan. There was also the view that activity 3, it can be interpreted more broadly to consider intergenerational transmission of knowledge, the strengthening of knowledge at the ground level, the strengthening of the interface between Indigenous knowledge and science, as well as more formal education and the uptake of different forms of knowledge within public education. So, and as Pasang used the language, creating a bifurcation between the 2 different styles of knowledge transmission. There was a lot of attention on the application of Indigenous knowledge to livelihoods, but also the continuing culture of Indigenous peoples. There was talk about the way in which adaptation, for example, is conceptualized by Indigenous people versus how it's conceptualized within policy frameworks or science frameworks. And this is an area that could do with more attention and exploration. There was very strong emphasis by everybody who was intervening, but particularly there were some very good Arctic interventions around the importance of youth as being co-creators of this process. And there was a general principle that it would be valuable to put together an international roundtable that would be co-created by Indigenous youth. And there were some good examples, including the Helsinki dialogue on Indigenous knowledge within the global assessment of IPBES as a way of looking at how to do such multiple knowledge processes. I was running out of time writing my notes here, but we were also looking at the possibility of studying some of the processes in other parts of the UN, in particular the flow from the UN CBD, from its own convention instruments and decisions, to how IPBES has taken some of that and moved it forward with Indigenous knowledge, and how that's now coming into national processes with national ecosystem assessments. And there were several offers to engage or promote dialogue with the IPCC as well as other knowledge bodies within the UN system. There was also attention to the 3 UN decades that will go on simultaneously with the new work program. And we won't get into all the details again, we can summarize that in notes, but the 3 decades include the UN ocean decade on the UN decade for ocean science for sustainable development, which impacts on many Indigenous peoples, and climate is very central there. The International Decade on Indigenous Languages, and there was a lot of attention on the link between Indigenous languages, Indigenous knowledge, and the participation of Indigenous people in decision-making. And then the UN Decade on Ecosystems Restoration, where again, Indigenous peoples as knowledge holders and experts are very key actors, and the potential of a work plan that synergizes with these other UN processes, which would be complementary. There was a lot of other rich comments, and I think if I may end there, we had the input from the chief who spoke, who pointed out that Indigenous peoples have multiple ways of knowing, including their sense of what is the future and their prophecies, and that what's important is to look at preparedness and that the engagement and dialogue between Indigenous knowledge holders and scientists help everyone be prepared for what is coming in the future. So if I've left out any key points, please to the Secretariat or the facilitators to pick those up. I can send through some more detailed notes after this meeting. Thank you. And I think I need to stop sharing.
Thank you, Nigel. That was a really helpful summary. I appreciate the focus on some of the larger kind of overarching themes, as well as some reflections on the specific activities of the work plan. And I also take note of the reference to youth. I think that is something that I observed, at least in all the discussions that I was able to take part in. So thank you for that. With that, I'd like to call upon the next breakout group, the breakout group on capacity for engagement, which I believe was facilitated by Rodion. And if I'm remembering correctly, I believe Irina was the rapporteur. So Irina, I'd like to give the floor to you to give us a short summary.
Thank you very much, Tom. It was a very rich discussion inside our group. There were several elements that were repetitive, especially the participation of youth and women in the process. So Dali had a very kind of her to send me a specific message, greeting message that was spoken first by Lese. So I would like to forward just like it is. It says strengthening youth engagement, in direct collaboration with Indigenous youth, host a roundtable with broad youth participation from each of the district Indigenous peoples' sociocultural regions to comprehensively explore concrete ways and means to accommodate the status, role, rights, and participation of Indigenous youth in the FWG and in UNFCCC overall, with a deadline of completion of a roundtable in 1 year, followed by implementation of the recommendations originating from the roundtable within the time frame of the 3-year work plan. Such recommendations may include structures, mechanisms, or a new body. And I thank very much Dali for this important greeting message. Not to lose anything, it was very nice to hear Lessa giving that idea. The document I received from Dali has a different points, elements, and maybe I would forward this message to Coco so that everybody have this in their hands. I would like also to stress other points that we could cover. Just give me a second so that I can read my notes. Yes, talking about the youth participation, we had this rich discussion, as I said, and the specific highlights is that if they cannot go everybody to or they don't have access to the internet, they can specifically add one person, one young person, as for instance, to participate with the member. So it was a specific idea of Jane. I think it was very important so that this young person can participate together with a representative in the facilitative working group, and they can go back not only in this case but also in the participation in the broader activities of the facilitative working group with workshops and meetings. They can go back to their communities and they can spread the knowledge that they got into these meetings. It was mentioned specifically for certain regions, the accessibility of internet is difficult. And also there was a comments about how inside the caucus is needed to have a specific leverage on what is needed in knowledge and rights and cultural specificities in every Indigenous people's communities, so that directly they can see what they need to know and come back in the broader spectrum of what we are doing and focus their interest on. It was a very good comment by Grim, which I would like to tell you to all of you, and maybe later if we can explain more about this. I think it's very, very important. Also, we have the discussion of the accessibility of the documents, not only in the working language in English, but also in other languages. And that is a challenge, for instance, to have the documents translated in the language of Indigenous peoples directly, and that I think is a very important challenge, since we have here being gathered and we have a translation, but in English and Spanish and French, but all the documents are just in English. So that was highlighted in our meeting, and that we could do something to try to bridge this gap and to reach the communities with their own language. That would be very, very important. Also, we were talking about the participation not only of indigenous peoples and trying them to give or explain their cosmovision or knowledge according their culture, but also it was to have the specific important elements to the parties. For instance, to give the parties knowledge about human rights and human rights of indigenous peoples. It's important. The engagement on state parties in our meetings are very important, since we know the UNFCCC is built with them and with their guidance, and we are constructing all this plan of climate change with the states' participation. They need to know about the reality of indigenous peoples and get also the knowledge of human rights. The participation of women was recurrently come to the discussion, and it's because young people and also women specifically are very vulnerable in society in general, and also for climate change issues. So, and the engagement of women and young people in the building of policies, it was highlighted very important, and the decision making, they have to be engaged in all the processes, and also to participate, of course, in our space as a facilitated working group. I am just seeing if I miss something. Yes, we have the participation also of specific actors, regional actors from Panama, for Philippines, and others that gave us their own perspectives, and specifically they brought up as I tell you recurrently, the participation of young people and the problems of sorry, it just escaped to my words. The problem of natural disasters. Sorry for that. Natural disasters. So the need to engage them in those platforms, and it was very important that the comment by Hindu told us that it is important to create synergies among the other bodies of the UNFCCC. And here we talk about, for instance, the Nairobi Work Program, or the PCCB, or the LEG program, or LDC program, that can help us with this building capacity for indigenous peoples to get to know the ways to tackle climate change and these problems. I think we need to stress that also. I don't know if I have left something behind, and I would like to ask Rodion if I left something behind to help me. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks, Irina. Rodion, do you have anything additional to add? I just ask if you do to be brief, as we are running quite close on time.
Yes, thanks, Thomas, and thanks, Irina, for your great reporting back. Just two issues that we had a very rich discussion, and also I'm so happy that we have different representatives from member states, from youth generations, and also from indigenous peoples, of course. And so we have just a very multiple level of discussion there. And finally, also one of the points was that we should also to look and to complement from other processes on the United Nations like CBD and Sustainable Development Goals, where the climate change is a core and cross-cutting issue. So we should learn also from that processes as an input to climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Rodion. I'd now like to call on the third breakout group, which was co-facilitated by Alec. Thank you, Alec, for your efforts there. I'm not sure who the rapporteur was, so Alec, maybe you could call on them to provide a short summary.
Thanks, Tom. Maria was our rapporteur, but she had to dash out. So I'll do the presentation. We had a very rich discussion, and how I wished we had enough time, and also, it would have been really nice if we met in person with flip charts where people are jotting their ideas. But nevertheless, I think we did justice, under the circumstances. So here are some points. So these are points or discussions under function 3 of the LCIPP, that's climate change policies and actions. A recurring theme was the need to really operationalize the findings of the mapping and exploratory exercises that were carried out during the initial work plan, so that we develop concrete actions and toolkits. I mean, it's one thing to come up with plans and put them on the shelf and let them gather dust. So the need to really come up with concrete actions based on the findings of the initial work plan came out clearly, during the discussions. Also, the importance of inclusion and the idea that no one is left behind came out strongly. For instance, strengthening the ability of indigenous peoples to engage with NDCs, the global stock take, NABs, and also, engage with organizations such as IPCC when they're doing their assessment reports, while simultaneously, ensuring that all the relevant information is conveyed and disseminated to indigenous communities that might not have access. The need for enhancing the engagement of indigenous women and youth also came out strongly during our discussions. The need for a synthesis report to provide input to the global stock take was also stressed during the discussions. Equally, the need to engage customary law practices and indigenous values in the effort to address climate change was one issue that came out strongly in our discussions. And finally, the importance of developing a catalog of best practices to inform policymakers and showcase examples from countries where, for example, there's a stronger inclusion of indigenous peoples and local communities, regarding NDs, NAPs, and national policies, or, for example, where other action plans have been successfully conveyed to policymakers and constituted bodies. The example of the Gender Action Plan was preferred. So these would act as, good examples that would encourage other countries also to copy or emulate. So, co-chair, I mean, in a nutshell, these are, briefly some of the issues that were discussed in our group. We had really, valuable input from the members. Thank you.
Alec, and thank you to all the co-facilitators and the rapporteurs for that, those important contributions. I'd like to note that the Secretariat was also taking notes during the meeting, so anything that wasn't captured by the rapporteurs, feel free to send in your notes, but we also have the Secretariat taking notes, as well as the Menti I see in the chat. So if anyone would like to contribute anything, you can contribute anonymously as well. The Menti will remain open until what I see is 7:15 Central European summertime. I'm not sure how that translates to my time zone, but it will remain open. I'm just cognizant of time, and we have about 10 minutes left with the translators before they sign off. So what I would like to propose is that we have a brief round of comments, very brief, I'd ask, as I see 2 facilitative working group members already have their hands up. and then we will shortly conclude with some housekeeping announcements. After which we'll start the next day with a fuller reflection of the things that we've heard today, and I would invite everyone to reflect on what they've heard from the rapporteurs, who I think did a really good job. So with that, I'll turn to, I see Pasang's name first, so I'll turn to Pasang to offer her remarks, and I'd ask that all FWG members just be brief given the time constraints.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. I just would like to appreciate all the great discussion in all round. As we have already discussed in group 1, I just would like to highlight the group 3 that has already been shared just now. That I also would like to reiterate that customary laws recognition and practices is actually the basis of the protection of our knowledge value system. So this need to be enhanced, and this need to be part of the NDC or NAPS or NAPA or whatever adaptation or mitigation strategies at the national level, because of not having that part now, as I said earlier, also all these national policies, because they are more depending on the just secondary data. The secondary data hardly talks about the indigenous people's issues and concerns, hardly talk about the indigenous role and contribution. So it's very important to have a disaggregated data and the engagement of indigenous people in all this part. So that part. And another part I would like to highlight that on the JC. So we all are very fancy about calling JC, oh, we have a JC plan or gender plan. But the fact is that in the JC, we are always ignoring the important aspects of the half of the JC is the social inclusion. So, this is my experience, whether in the international level, at the national level, even local level, oh, we have a JC expert. But the JC expert is always talking about the women and men, forget about the social inclusion. That's how the indigenous people issues and concerns is being left out. So I would like to encourage that along with the gender action plan, indigenous action plan is very necessary in all process. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Pasang, and I think that's an important point. And I think in the climate policies and actions discussion, Sebastian made some interesting points along those lines. So we can definitely make sure that's captured in the inputs. Andrea, please go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciated in the knowledge discussion that the highlighting the first part of the paragraph 135 of the Paris decision. We mainly focus on the second part, which is creating a platform, but strengthening that knowledge and practice on the ground and finding out what those practitioners and knowledge holders, including our youth, need to keep strengthening, I think needs to be an overarching priority. So I'm glad we focused on that. I just have two quick almost housekeeping comments, I guess. One is, this came up in the chat in our discussion, is that the question about how we're defining these three categories. And so I just wanted to say that in Yo and I's introduction, with the strong recommendation of the Secretariat on board, we're reaffirming the three definitions that we came up in our first our first work plan, to not put those approved, which affirm rights, free, prior, informed consent, etc., and around knowledge, not put those for a discussion again of the COP and have to defend rights and all those things. So you might notice we're affirming that we start with those three definitions that were already approved and agreed by us as well as the COP. The third thing is for the members. We would really like it if we could approve activity 6 at this meeting, which means by the end of tomorrow. If people could look at it again, it's been circulated since November of last year with all the inputs into it. Mainly what we did this time is just change the format. If there's any way that we could approve it by the end of tomorrow so it can be part of the report of this meeting. If not, we can extend comment till like July 15th or so. So we could come up with the final by the end of July. So we'll talk about it again tomorrow, but if I could request you look at it and see if it's okay and if we can agree to it on a non-objection basis as part of this meeting by the end of tomorrow. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. To respond to that proposal, I'm fine with that. I do recognize that FWG members may want some more time with it. So if everyone's okay to approve it tomorrow, please, you don't have to indicate, but if anyone would like more time, July 15th, just indicate it in the chat, and then we'll take that into account and then come up with a proposal tomorrow. I see Daly has her hand up, so please go ahead, Daly.
Thank you very much. I want to also just say thanks to all of those non-FWG members that contributed to the discussions in the so-called breakout rooms. But I was struck by a comment from one of the sessions, and now I've forgotten exactly which one, but in relation to activity 3. And it's my understanding that this activity has had an update as one of the co-leads, along with Jane, and also fortunately with the involvement of Pasang, who's got a strong background in education, that we did update the concept note. The activity hasn't really had the benefit of advancing and moving forward for a host of different reasons. But more significantly, I think it's important for us to understand that the concept note was drafted in such a way that it embraced Indigenous perceptions of curriculum. I know that the term sounds, to me, certainly, even as a former professor, the term from an Indigenous perspective doesn't seem appropriate for what we are aiming to do as far as advancing Indigenous knowledge. But I think that we should spend a little bit more careful time in terms of the activity in order to carry it forward in a way that's responsive to the conceptions of Indigenous peoples about their knowledge as knowledge holders, and the importance of this, not in formal classroom settings, but in a host of diverse settings. So I just hope that we are going to be afforded the opportunity to conclude the activity, number one, but also the potential for continuing the activity. One of the things that we've heard, certainly from the Arctic region, and also just now in the capacity session that I was involved in from youth, that Indigenous knowledge is important. And one pathway toward strengthening it is through intergenerational education. And again, not education in terms of the Western or colonial context, but in a diverse array of contexts. So I just wanted to say that before we lost our train of thought on these important issues. So thank you.
Thanks, Daly. And note that's very much noted. Certainly, we're not closing the door on it. And I see Pasang is also vehemently nodding her head. So I think there is definitely more to consider on that activity, and we're certainly not closing the door to anything. I'm cognizant that we have 2 minutes left before the translation ends. So I note that in the chat, Lisa has asked if the breakout group notes can be shared with participants. I have no objections. I don't think my co-chair Hindu has any objections, but I recognize that they were shared. The participants offered those remarks in a closed door. So if anyone has any objections, I would ask you to just raise them in the chat. And if there are any objections, we will not share them broadly. Before I turn to the Secretariat for some final housekeeping notes, I just wanted to turn it to my co-chair Hindu to see if she has any concluding remarks.
Thank you very much.
I have a question, sorry, Hindu, about what you said. That what will be shared was a comment shared with the whole group, right? All the panelists? Because I know there was some private, like between individuals that maybe is not appropriate to share, but the ones that were shared with all the panelists or all the participants, I think, should already be fine. Just to make that comment. Thank you.
Sure. Maybe I could ask the Secretariat to quickly clarify what exactly would be shared? I see Coco saying in the chat.
Yeah, just in this point, thank you very much, Andrea, and also for the person who asked it. I think we didn't finish the work today because tomorrow we are going at the same breakout session. I do not see the importance of sharing it today. So what we said at the beginning of this meeting, that all what we discuss here, in addition to what the Facilitative Working Group discussed before this meeting, going to be put it in a table. And then these tables going to be shared with all of us that can help us to get a visual for the tomorrow discussion, if there is something left out, or if there are things that are doubling. So in the breakout session, we can work on these today ideas and Facilitative Working Group ideas to build up on it. So don't be worried at all. This group, this body, it's supposed to be inclusive as example for all the rest. So all what you said is going to be coming up, but coming up in a clear way that the Secretariat will support us to do it. So sorry, so just Tom, as we agreed yesterday in our call, I just wanted to put it clear for all the people to understand how will be the process that we will come on it with them. And thank you so much. I mean, I'm not taking more time because interpreters are really wanted to leave, and I'm seeing also my sister Dali wanted to say something. So I leave you the remaining time that I have, Dali. And then I do not talk tomorrow.
Yeah, as a courtesy to my FWG fellow members, I just wanted to let you know that I will not be present tomorrow due to another commitment with the FAO and preparations for the Global Food System Summit, but my alternate and my friend and colleague Lisa Koperquilak will be here on my behalf. So again, as a courtesy, I wanted to ensure that you knew that in advance. When that meeting concludes, and if you're still continuing, I'll join you at that time. So thank you for your understanding in advance.
Thank you, Daly. So that sounds like a good approach, and thank you for your comments, Hindu, and welcome, Lisa, for tomorrow's discussions. So as Hindu just mentioned, we will take the inputs that we got from the rapporteurs and the notes of the Secretariat and come up with a bit of a draft table that everyone can react to and go back into with in the breakout sessions tomorrow. So with that, I'll just pass it to Coco for some closing housekeeping announcements, and then we'll close.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tom and Hindu as our co-chairs, to all of the rapporteurs, and of course, FWG and all of you. It's been a heavy lifting day. I'm sure you're maybe a little bit tired. Just a quick look ahead until tomorrow. Tomorrow's day 4. FWG 5 will conclude after tomorrow. So the first part of the day will be one more breakout group discussion. So it'll be the same procedure as today. You'll get the links in the chat box. You're welcome to join other breakout groups if you'd like to go over and discuss a different function. Absolutely welcome. And that will take us from around the beginning of the day at 4 p.m. Central European time. That is whatever your time. So that will be from about 4 p.m. until about 5:30 p.m., including a break. After that, everyone will reconvene in the plenary, and we'll take care of the last items on the agenda, which are agenda item 6 is enhancing coherence under the convention. And during that portion of the program, we'll have a discussion, of course, with FWG and some guests from other UNFCCC constituted bodies may also join that part of the program just to talk with all of you. I know in some of the breakout groups, some ideas involved inviting collaboration with some of those other bodies. After that, we'll have the dialogue with contributors. And the last 2 parts of the program are 1, any other matters. And Daly on the first day brought up the idea of including a terms of reference. And then Tom yesterday also suggested that the issue of translation be discussed under any other matter so the FWG could make a decision that could be recorded in the meeting report. Following that, that's the very last item of the day. That's agenda item 8. that will conclude the meeting, including the dates for FWG 6. And with that, back to you.
Great, thank you very much, Coco. And just a final thanks to all the co-facilitators of the breakout groups, all the rapporteurs, and everyone who contributed their really useful perspectives and discussions. As always, I think we had a really rich discussion, and I know Hindu and mine and the Secretariat's work is cut out for us to accurately capture everything that was said, so we can have another enriching discussion tomorrow on the work plan and continue our work going forward. So with that, I'd like to just thank you all once more and wish you all a good morning, evening, or afternoon, whatever time it might be in your region, and see you tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you.